Welcome, I'm Darren, and I'll be your guide today as I look at the Pacific Gridiron cards and Lithocell cards of 1995 and 1996. Pacific, by the mid-90s, had been doing some fun stuff. They'd been doing some creative stuff like the Prism cards and the Triple Folders cards that had led up to this point. But in 1995, they really kind of let loose and did some stuff that was truly out there. The most distinctive one was Crown Royale, of course, which was the first full-blown card set that was die-cut. It was really, really impressive. But they did another set in 1995 that was kind of a heritage of triple folders. So triple folders had been oversized cards, basically twice the size of a regular card. By 1995, they trimmed that down to a regular size card, and then they just kind of gave up the ghost. But in 95, the idea of having an oversized card, it kind of stuck with Pacific, and they wanted to do a full-blown set for this. And so they came up with Gridiron. And Gridiron was a really impressive venture into the world of oversized cards. Now this is a full-blown set. This is 100 cards. So this is the whole league. I mean, this is really serious what they were attempting to do. The amount of real estate that they had made these kind of like small posters, which gave them the ability to not get too picky about the images that they select. As long as you can clearly see who the player is, you don't have to do framing, and you don't have to have card design to really frame the player into the card. So they let this be just a full bleed card, and then they just had a little bit of foil for the player name and for the logo. And it's just the logo, not even the brand name, just Pacific. That's all that they put on the front. And that's all that they needed to. On the card back, it was an interesting approach they did because they had a ton of real estate, so they kind of leisurely took their time to put a whole bunch of text on the back, and it works well in terms of having all this big write-up. But what's really significant about this is the fact that they actually, in the write-up, they talk about the game that the photo on the card front had been taken from. It was a pretty novel approach that they did. And also down at the bottom, you may notice that they have the photographer as well. They have the photographer listed. Now this is significant for Pacific because the co-founders were photographers. And Michael Kramer is one of the few card executives who actually put his name out there and made it something of significance. He wasn't quite at the level of Lud Denny, but he was pretty close. And so here he actually did give an acknowledgement to the photographers who, in many cases, like in this one, was Michael Kramer himself. But the idea of doing this write-up about the particular game that the photo was taken from is a neat idea that they went with, and it is kind of cool to have a whole write-up about a game as they've done in this nature. But this is Pacific, and it's got foil on the front, and so that means only one thing. There has to be something about this that has to do with parallels, and in this case, very much so. So they had two foil parallels. They had the blue and they had the red. One of them was for retail and the other one was for hobby. So these cards came one per pack. That was it. One card per pack. And it was kind of a weird experience to go through because you go out and you spend $1 or whatever. They weren't expensive packs, but you open it up and you get just one card, and there's this weird feeling because it's like that was it. That was the only thing. It was almost like gambling in a way. It was kind of a bold thing that they did. But that meant that for a 36 card box, a 100 card set, you had to buy 3 boxes in order to get a complete set. And again, that's either for the blue or the red. You have to get the other 3 in order to get both sets, and that's if you're not getting a bunch of doubles. So these sets were pretty tough to put together. And they weren't pursued to the extent that would have been nice, but that still, they were a fun novelty that they did. But it wasn't just that. They did actually have other parallels. So they had a copper version, and they also had a platinum version. And so one of them was in hobby packs, the other one was in retail packs. But they also had a gold version, and this would show up in either one of the packs. So the gold versions were in hobby packs. They were also in retail packs, but they were very rare. Now, I've heard that there are only 30 copies of each. I don't know exactly how many they were doing at that time. 30 would sound about right, but they are very rare. But again, the gold is not distinguished between hobby or retail like the other ones are. So there are 5 versions of each one of these cards, and you're either collecting one pair or the other pair of parallels. But that was it. That was all there was to 95 Gridiron. They didn't do any inserts, nothing. It was just one card per pack, just about as straightforward as it possibly gets. Now, they were popular enough to justify doing a second year. So in 1996, again, they had these oversized cards, and they followed pretty much the same template. The images were a little bit better in 1996. 95, they had some really good images, and a few of them got a little fuzzy, especially when they went in and they were doing the airbrushing. But in 1996, the images tended to be stronger, although not necessarily as interesting. But they did make the card design a little bit more interesting because they still had the player name and the company logo, but they also had kind of an arc, and then they had a shadow behind the player name, and they also had some texturing in the foil. So the way that all the elements on the bottom of the card, the way they came across looked more interesting, but at the same time it wasn't as bold as the previous year. Again, these cards on the card back talk about the game that was shown on the front. So that again was a fun thing they did, but here they leaned a little bit more into the whole idea of this is like a magazine, or more like a newspaper. That was really kind of the theme they were going with. So they did do that, and they did still give the credit for the photographer. And also, like in the previous year, they did do the parallels. So they have the blue and they have the red, and then they also have the copper and they also have the platinum, and then they did the gold again as well. So they still had all that going on. But in this case, they didn't have just one card per pack. They actually had 2 cards per pack. The second card was their Gridiron Gems card in almost all cases. And so the Gridiron Gems card was a 3/4 bleed card with kind of some detailing around the outside, some weird things going around the outside. And then down at the bottom, they have kind of a perspectival football field in green foil. That was the design. Pretty terrible card design. These are very common cards. You run into them pretty easily because they came up in the packs all the time, and it was only a 50 card set. So it's actually half as many cards as the cards in the main set, even though they're coming up at the same rate as the main cards in the set. And on the card back, they actually did a horizontal orientation, which looks pretty nice. I like the way the colors are. They didn't use the text area too well, but still, it does look kind of cool. But these cards came almost 1 per pack because they did have a couple of other inserts that would pop up in these packs from time to time. And the first one is Gold Crown die cuts. Now these were, I've heard that they weren't ready for release, but I'm pretty sure that's not the case, because if you only have 2 cards per pack, a die cut card can get damaged pretty easily. So I have a feeling that they didn't want the cards to get damaged, so they did a later release. But in the packs, instead of getting the actual die cut card, you got a redemption card, and the redemption card this is the full size, and it has what looks like a card back with, right up at the top, right around the actual die cut area, you see a football field that's kind of like something they'd done the previous year in triple folders. And then it tells you who the player is for that particular redemption card. So each redemption card is specified for a particular player. And so it shows you who it is, and then they have the little write-up about what you do. And when you flip it over to the other side, that's the actual redemption card order form. And then down below that, you can see that they have the players specified, but they also have a checklist of all of the players in this set. So this is interesting because they had every single player in the set had the redemption cards that were redeemed, and then they also had these redemption cards for sending away. So you have the actual card and you have the send away card. So that means 2 for every single player. And in packs, these are the ones you're going to be running into, the redemption send away cards. As far as the actual cards themselves, the die cut cards, these are kind of like the release, they're like bigger versions of the main release cards, or the regular Pacific card inserts, the crown die cuts there. These are a little bit different. They're a lot better. They really do look good. I like the way the colors are on them. They're fantastic. But also when you flip it over, here they finally use the real estate. They put a lot of writing on the back. And so you get to sit there and really read quite a bit about the player. And I don't know why they didn't do this more often. I mean, almost nobody has done this, taken the opportunity to really go into it. So in this case, I think it's a really successful card on every front. I like the big size. I like the design, the way the design came through. I think it's a lot better than any of the other, well, probably any other die cut card that Pacific did. And the use of the real estate on the back was great. Then they also had driving force cards, and this is a bunch of running backs. This is a very foil heavy card. Now they have a lot of texturing in the foil, so there's a lot of interest that goes into it, even though the foil is kind of overpowering. But I like how right down the middle of the card they have a lot of colors, and the colors for the player name, I think all that works really well to have a really nice looking card. The card back, on the other hand, to me this is a little bit too bold. This looks like a card that was designed to be a regular card size, and then they just made it bigger. But the card front still does look really good. And then the last insert that they did for this was their rock solid rookies. And this is an interesting card because they have gold detailing around the outside. Again, it's modeled, and they have kind of a rock theme. That's kind of the approach that they went with. And then you have the player in the middle, and then around the player you have kind of a weird effect for the background. So this is an extremely busy card. There's a ton of stuff going on. Nothing is really all that distinctive. Nothing really stands out. But because it's such a big card, this is something you kind of want to spend the time to explore. And so that means it's a lot more effective, because if this was small, this is a card you just skip right over. But because it's big, I think that having all of this stuff on it, it really does work pretty well. And I really like the card back. It's kind of a muted feeling to it. The colors are kind of subdued. The way that the marble theme kind of sits behind everything, a little tough to read the text, but that's all right. It's actually pretty easy to read overall. But then down the sides, I like the way the text is. To me, this is a really good, it's not a great card back, but it is a good card back that works well with a good card front. So I think this is pretty successful. But that was Pacific Gridiron. That was the 2 years. They made it for 95 and 96, and they just didn't have enough steam to continue it on. But 96 was where they were branching out over into other sets, and they didn't really need these gimmick sets that they've been creating. But that doesn't mean that 1996, that this was the only gimmick set. Basically, it had triple folders going for a couple of years, and it ended in 95. And the gimmick of triple folders was not continued specifically, but the idea of doing something that was truly 100% a gimmick, that was revived for one more year. And that was done for a card set called Lithocell. Now, Lithocell is about the most unique card set you're going to find, period. I mean, this sucker is so unique that it stands up against any insert. But this was a full-blown set. This was a 100 card set. Just like Gridiron, this was a serious set. Well, I shouldn't say it was a serious set. It was a 100 card set that you pursue like a serious card, and yet it was 100% gimmick. And it was 100% awesome in that regard. The Lithocell cards come with 2 cards for each card. Now, the main card, which is called the Litho card, this is a thin card. It's a regular card, and it's a full bleed image of the player. It has some detailing around the outside. It has some kind of gold print patterns that go off on either side. You have the player name in gold print pattern. You have the logo that's up there. You have an interesting little 4 colored discs that kind of cross over. That's kind of the Lithocell theme. That's the logo. And then on the card back, there's basically absolutely nothing. There's a player shot. There's a subtractive name on the side. And then over on the other side, you have kind of a blue border over there, and then you have litho and the card number. That's it. That's it. They don't say anything. I mean, you never even see what team this player plays for. You do see the position on the front, but that's it. It's the player name and the position, and that is it. It is a surprisingly stark card. But on the card front, you'll notice that there's this big oval right in the middle, and it's almost like the sun has bleached out the color. And that's the whole point of Lithocell, because this is the Litho card, but there's also a Cell card. Now, the Cell card is exactly the same as the Litho card. It's a little bit thicker, but it has the same image around the full bleed image around the outside. It has, instead of gold print, they have actual gold foil, and some of that gold foil is modeled. They still have the logo. I mean, everything about the card front is the same, except you'll notice that big oval is now just flat out missing. And on the card back, they have literally nothing. I mean, they have some kind of patterns back there, but they have Cell and then the card number. So for every card, they have a Litho card and they have a Cell card. And the whole point of the Cell is that right in the middle, they have an acetate sheet. And in that acetate sheet, they have blue printing of everything that's missing on the Litho card in that oval. So when you line the two up, all of a sudden, all the print lines up with the right amount of color, and the picture almost pops. It finally looks right. That's it. That's all it was about. It was such a weird thing, because when you look at the Cell cards, it has this strange blue quality on it. And then when you look at the Litho cards, it looks like they're damaged in a way. So when you look at them individually, they don't make sense. But when you put them together, they're a really cool little idea that they did. Now, this is also a Pacific set, which means that this is gold foil, so you're going to have parallels. And they do have 2 parallels. They have silver and they also have copper. So they have the gold version, which is the base, they have silver, and they have copper. But what makes this card set so difficult to collect is the fact that in a pack you got a Cell card, a Litho card, and a insert card. That's it. Just those three. So in a 36 pack box, you're going to get a third of the set of litho cards, a third of the cell cards, and they're not going to line up. So you got to go through box after box after box after box to try to put these together. And you got to go through a lot of packs in order to get all of the pieces. They were not all that popular at the time, so I bought them, all of the ones I got a year or two later. I think I got like 7 boxes of these and just tore through them. I still didn't complete I think it was the cell set I didn't complete, but I think I did complete the litho cards. I'm not sure how it worked, but I was 2 cards away from completing the set by the end. It was really interesting how much you had to go through, and it was all about completion, because if you got 1 card, it didn't mean anything. You had to get the second. A bold move that they made, a fun move that they made, something they could never repeat. This was a one and done, and even at that, it wasn't quite a one and done. This was one of those cases where Pacific put something out there for fun that was a part of their portfolio. That's really kind of what these cards were about. So that was the main set. But then I mentioned that every single pack had an insert card in it. And the main insert card that they had was their game time cards. Now, 1996 was when they started doing these secondary sets. So it's like a whole nother set that you get to collect just kind of on the side. These cards would just kind of pop up, and it'd be 100, 110, 120 cards. And they were players who weren't all that popular. I mean, they'd have some stars in there, but it was primarily players that weren't all that popular, which would give you access to more players from your team, but also the opportunity for players who aren't likely to show up. So one of Terrell Owens' rare rookie cards is in one of these sets. Game Time was the one that they did for Lithocells. And it's not a very good card set. They have kind of a marble-like or a gray border around the outside. They have some like tickets inside, and then the player image inside of that. And it's too busy. On the card back, it's okay. It kind of suffices. But these were kind of like throwaway cards. The whole point of this was you didn't want to open up a pack and get just 2 cards. And so they had a 3rd card in there just as a filler, which was a neat idea. I'm glad that they did it, but they're not very exciting cards. But Game Time did have one interesting thing, which is that the last 4 cards in the set these were related to the new expansion teams, so the Jaguars and Panthers, and these have gold foil, modeled gold foil around the outside. So that's actually a neat thing that they added to this set. Just those cards at the end. They look kind of weird, but they are neat to run into. So the first of these insert cards is Featured Performers, and these cards are almost all gold foil, textured gold foil. It's kind of got some break patterns, but it's too much gold foil, and yet it actually kind of works because they also have some rich colors in there, and the player is not overly dominated by the texturing in there, and it does have the texturing of the helmet of the player. So overall, all of the pieces work pretty well. It's not a great card, but it's kind of a fun card. And the card back is just kind of an insert card back, very difficult to read, but it is what it is. The second set that they did was Moments in Time, and this refers to a significant game, either because they did something great or because they crossed some threshold. And so on the front, it's basically designed like a scoreboard. It's horizontal with a die cutting that, in that regard, it's actually kind of cool. On the card back, they talk a little bit about the game, the event, and so that's what these cards are about. They're okay. But the really interesting one, the good one, the cool one that at least I really think is kind of cool, is their litho-proof cards. And this is the last of their insert sets. And these are they're the thickness of the litho cards. So they're regular thin cards, but this is basically what the card is supposed to look like if all of the printing is done right. And in that regard, it's a great card. Now the card back itself actually looks different. Here they're actually writing up. They do a write-up about the player. So this is kind of like the finished card, as if the main cards in the set were just kind of a test project that they did within Pacific, which is kind of a strange approach they did, but I do like it. But the lithoproof cards, as a result, are even more special. So that's a neat thing about these cards, but also on the card back, you'll notice they're all numbered out of 360. So they are a little bit more rare. They're all individually numbered. However, they also have a distinctive group within this, which is called the certified proof. Now, there's nothing on the card to say that it's a certified proof. You have to know it. But if you look at the serial numbering on the back, the first, I haven't heard definitively, I've heard it's only the first 20, that could be. I really can't tell you how many, but the low number cards are the certified, and on the front, if you turn the card just right, you can see the light glinting off. You can see that they embossed the Pacific logo on the front. So that is what makes these certified cards distinctive from the rest. But they are the low number, the really, really, really low numbered cards. Other than that, that is lithocells. I mean, lithocells was an interesting little thing they tried. It was over before, almost before it began. It's one of those rare things you're hardly ever going to come into, but if you run into them, understand this is what they are. But that's kind of the way it is with Gridiron too. So these are very unique card sets that it's difficult to really talk about them with anything else because they're so distinctive. But that was a big thing with Pacific. They love to do these little 1 and 2 year long runs. So that is basically what I've got to talk about here. So definitely, I hope you've learned something. If you have yet to subscribe, definitely do so. Check out other videos I've done, and thank you very much for watching.